right, so welcome back. This is the last portion, or maybe kind of bonus portion, of the first tutorial. And what I want to show you is just a really simple function called split list. And in order to do that, first we have to talk about what is a list. And so where we ended up with were these two circles that are rotating that create what appear to be a kind of erratic curve. But from the simplest of operations, just two circles rotating at a different frequency of different sizes can produce this type of geometry. And we can get into more detail about maybe why you would want to play with this type of geometry, other types of things like that. But for now, we'll hold off on that. What I want to do is I want to look at our interpolate curve that we ended with in the previous session. I can even hide the preview. Now we see the interpolate curve. We can leave this because we do want that representation, but we may split it up in a second. So I'm going to create a panel. And I actually want to come back one step. I'm going to come to this set of points. And if we mouse over it, we can see it's a collection of three-dimensional points. I'm going to plug it into the panel. And we can see it's a lot of points. There's a lot of data here that we're managing. So there's 100 points. They all have, let's see, they all have X, Y, and Z. Z is always 0 because we're just working in a two-dimensional geometry. So this list is what the interpolate curve is using. And so you can see that it's coming, the multiple data that's coming into interpolate curve, we can see a kind of double line. What's coming out is just one curve, and so that wire is just one line. What we can do is we can split this list into two parts. And so there's a command or a component for this under lists called split list. And this is really just a quick introduction to lists. We'll do a lot more with managing data. But what I want to do is to, let's see, we'll pull in this list of points. And so the input that we need is lists. And then here's the integer about where we're going to split that list. And so the way that we're going to split that list, well, let's see. Let's start with just a kind of local slider right here. Let's say 10 less than 100. And we'll plug this in. And now, why don't I make two panels? One from A and one from B. And now you'll see what happens is that as we, here I'll even lower this to 0. So as we go from 0 to 100, list A now has 0, list B has 100. And all I'm doing is basically moving that divider that will put more or less in one container or one list than the other list. As I increase this, you can see one list getting bigger, one list getting smaller. And the reason why we want to use this split list is that what we want to do is we now want to interpolate two curves. One curve that hasn't been drawn yet by our animation, the other half that has. And so what we'll do is we will look now, and rather than do this manually, we want to tie it back to our animation slider. But remember, we're going from 0 to 270. And so what we want to do is, and this list is 100 items long. And so what we want to do is to take whatever value we have. We want to take, let's see, 360. That will be over 360. And so we can start pulling these items over. we'll go from our rotation angle, and let's even just set this to 360, which we know is halfway. So it'll be easy to test that. We're close to it. Actually, let's do this. 360. Okay. So let's pull this, and we want to divide 360 by 720. So right down here, let's add a division, which is just a little component. We're going to divide A over B. So B, we can right click, set this to be 720. And A, zoom out. It's a little hard to do this when we're so zoomed out, but we'll take rotation angle. And this will be A. So now the result of that is 50%, 50% of the way there. So now what we want to do is to multiply, remember multiplication, we want to multiply this, A times B. So A is going to be that percentage of the list, and B is going to be the list itself, which was the number of steps. And so we can pull this all the way over to B. Now this is telling us one locally defined value at 50. Plug that in. We can delete this slider. So now we'll see what happens, although it's going to be really hard to see what happens by changing that rotation angle. Can I do this when I'm zoomed out? Not really. We pull them closer just to prove what's happening. So as we go down from 360, that first list gets smaller. As we go up, the first list gets bigger, the second list gets smaller. And so we don't need the panels anymore, other than to know that, let's see, where is our angle, rotation angle? Let's set it in the low range so that now, which is the smallest, A is the smallest. So let's do two things. We can copy our interpolate curves. Let's see, just off to the side. Move these down maybe. So our A list is going to be what's drawn. So we'll plug this into interpolate curve. And our B list I want to do it maybe without the pipe. And I can even change the color. Say okay. So let's see if this is what we're not seeing right now is because we have the previews hidden. And let's come all the way back to the animation and make sure that this works. So here's the rotation angle. Seems to be working. And the thing that can happen that's a little bit off, probably what we're seeing right here, is a couple of things. One is that the number of interpolated points, when that number is low, let's increase this. we can see we get a little bit more fidelity and a little bit more precision over our curves. And so when we split that list down, it's interpolating a small number of points. And so that's why as the list shifts from one to the other, we're getting more or less points on either side and then interpolating that curve. The last thing, let's see, is our split is the list of points. I want to hide those points. We can see that our first, the thick line that we're drawing now has an error because it doesn't have any values. That list is empty. As soon as we slide that slider, and as soon as that gets one value, or I guess as soon as it gets two values, it'll begin interpolating a curve between those 2 points. So let's go all the way back to rotation angle and slowly begin sliding along this as it begins to build that curve. You can see it's also a little bit off between some of those things that it's drawing, between the animation and the panel. And I think the reason for that is we can look at this in subsequent tutorials. It just has to do with reparameterizing those. We could operate on this in a couple of different ways, but this was the easiest way for us to just begin to represent the line that's about to be drawn versus the line that is drawn through that animation. All right, and so now you've got the kind of best of both in that you have a procedural representation for what those lines or what that curve can be. And again, we still have that association between the geometry that's here and all of our other parameters and being able to manipulate these things. And so again, play with this a bit. Between your different parameters and the locations of these objects and the animation that you can build with that. So have some fun, play a bit with what you're presenting for the submission, and I'd like to see a number of different iterations of you playing with those parameters and looking at that range of possibilities. So I hope this does two things actually. One, I hope you have a little bit of fun and you start to get a sense for these things. Again, I'm leading you quickly. Over time, you're going to get a sense for what components to use, why use them in a certain order, what they need as inputs, and what they'll give you as outputs. I'm going quickly just because I want you to start to have something, as opposed to you can imagine a really boring way of like, here's a component, here's what it does, here's a component, here's what it does. We're going to build things, you're going to learn about these things as we go, and now what you should do is just tinker a little bit and play with the definition that we have on the left and see if you can get it to do certain things that you want it to do on the right, and work back and forth between those two. So I hope you have fun. I hope you also have a little bit of sense of like, oh my God, there's so many things that we just covered. Starting to look at lists, looking at, we animated something, we had a list, we did different things. So these things will get easier. These things will make more sense the more that we work with them. But again, I wanted to do something that's both pushing our limits and lays out a kind of clear set of operations that helps you build something and allows you to start imagining the opportunity or the potential of designing with procedures, thinking about, okay, what thing comes first, then how do I order those things? How do I communicate that information? So I hope this part A to this first tutorial helps you get a sense for that. So have fun with this, and then we'll pick up with the next part.